Good afternoon, and thank you for joining the Future of Finance and the institutional adoption in crypto markets. I shall now pass you over to Dominic Hobson and the panel.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to our webinar on institutional engagement with the cryptocurrency markets. I'm Dominic Hobson, co-founder of Future of Finance, and it's my privilege to moderate our discussion today. Well, it's been quite a journey since the cryptocurrency bust back in 2018. Back then, the market was valued at less than $130 billion. Today, it's worth 1.75 trillion. The market cap of Bitcoin alone has increased more than tenfold in the last 12 months alone. Now, there's obviously more than one reason for that, but an important factor has been growing institutional interest in the asset class. Asset managers, wealth managers, private banks, corporate treasurers are all investing. The crypto is still a volatile market in terms of price and an immature market in terms of infrastructure, both of which make it a lot easier to lose money than it is in the traditional markets. Now, to help institutional investors find a safe way into the cryptocurrency markets, I'm joined by three CEOs who've joined forces to provide exactly that safe path. Alex Batlin is CEO of Trustology, the London-based provider of cryptocurrency safekeeping and digital asset servicing services for institutional investors, corporate and private clients active in cryptocurrency and digital asset markets. Lars Holst is CEO of GCX, the London headquartered brokerage platform for brokers, managers of cryptocurrency funds and other professional traders and trading houses that wish to trade cryptocurrencies as well as traditional assets. Rosario Ingargiola is founder and CEO of Bosonic, the San Francisco-based company which aims to eliminate counterparty credit and settlement risk for institutional investors in cryptocurrencies. Now, in addition to our panelists, we do, of course, also have you, our audience, and we want your questions and we want your comments. So send them and keep sending them throughout the discussion via the Q&A functionality at the bottom of your Zoom screens. We will not be saving them up to the end, but answer them as we go along. So you will be, if you choose to be, an integral part of this discussion. Now, we're going to begin by establishing what exactly are the obstacles that institutional investors face in accessing the digital asset markets. And the first is obviously price discovery or liquidity, a better way of putting it. Where do you find liquidity? Exchanges seem the obvious place to look, but there are alternatives such as CFDs. Lars, perhaps I could begin with you. Could you talk us through the options that institutional investors face in terms of searching for liquidity in these new markets?
Yeah, sure, Dominic. And thanks for letting me participate today. So unlike traditional markets, it's much more fragmented and I guess in the bigger picture, still relatively small. And there's no standardization in the way we contract, the legal framework with how we deal with each other. No ISDAs, no prime brokerage structure as of yet. So it's fragmented and even very, very intelligent people that's been in the market for many years, they still tell me, how do we actually get started? But liquidity sources, Rosario, of course, has a lot of connectivity to liquidity, but you have exchanges and then you have a lot of dedicated market makers. And I guess as a backup, you could also take some liquidity from the CME. But I think in summary, pretty fragmented. You need to know where to look if you want to go outside the biggies exchanges, and just be careful with how you interact and safety and how you contract with them.
You say it's fragmented. There are hundreds of exchanges, Lars, and institutions are coming out of a background where there's like a handful of exchanges even in major markets. They're entering a market which came out of bulletin boards and it's got this 24/7 trading structure. They're brought up in a best execution world, which applies here as well. And they're used to things like liquidity aggregation tools as well. So it is a very weird environment if you're used to as you said, the traditional markets. What's the comfort you can offer them?
So I guess what we have done is, sourcing liquidity from multiple venues, trying to eliminate a bit of the headache. You deal with regulated counterparty, FCA regulated, that is. Of course, we have to be more precise these days. And But broadly, crypto spot is an unregulated activity, like foreign exchange spot has been throughout the years and still is to a large extent. So crypto spot is not bound by best execution rules and RTS 27, RTS 28, without getting too technical, and it's not governed by standardized documentation like an ISTA or CSA or similar. So it is more done on a bilateral basis. But we've gone through a lot of the pain points doing liquidity connectivity and setting up some legal frameworks with a number of counterparties and exchanges. But it's it just takes time, and it's probably capital intensive because there's no central clearer as we're used to from the traditional market, and that's really the pain points that we have solved in close cooperation, of course, with Rosario and Alex from Bosonic and Trustology.
Now, Rosario, as Lars has just said, there is no central counterparty clearinghouse to take away the counterparty risk here. And as he also said right at the outset, there are no prime brokers either. And there are reasons why institutional investors like prime brokers and like the central counterparty clearinghouse. They use them for a reason. How can they work in these markets without those institutions?
I think it's pretty tough. I mean, and the reason why they like central counterparties and prime brokerage is because the core function of those things is to provide that credit intermediation piece. So I think there's a lot of confusion in the crypto space where people think prime brokerage means maybe it means lending. They think it means liquidity aggregation, but really those things are sort of supported by the core function, which is the credit intermediation piece. And that's basically, in a traditional market like FX, it's a major bank stepping in with their balance sheet and essentially becoming the counterparty to all of the participants. And so obviously that does not exist in the digital space. What we at Bosonic have tried to do, and I think done a pretty good job at, is use pure technology to solve that problem, where people can basically hold their assets at an independent custodian like Trustology, and they can transact with any other counterparty, for example, GCX, the liquidity that they have, without actually having to take any counterparty credit or have any settlement risk by virtue of how the technology is implemented.
Alex, you just heard Rosario say that his model allows people to work with the custodian they choose. Now, one of the things that put off institutional investors in the early days of this market was that they were having to deal with exchanges in particular who were also acting as the custodian. There was an obvious conflict of interest there. So what do you say to institutional clients who are approaching this market in a rather nervous frame of mind for the first time about, who's going to be looking after my stuff? How do you reassure them?
Sure. I mean, I guess one of the constant questions was around regulation. First of all, from money laundering point of view, through to kind of what does custody actually mean in crypto? What does liability look like? Because the traditional custody business is you give somebody their assets, they service those assets, they do record keeping, the liabilities on the custodian, and then all the servicing is done by the custodian. In the crypto space, it doesn't work that way. In reality, what you're doing is custodying assets that are keys, not the assets themselves, because everything is protected. You're no longer doing record keeping, that's the blockchain. So we saw early custodians adopt old-fashioned model where you send your assets to an omnibus key to the custodian, and then the only utility you can extract out of the assets with the custodian is the security. But you are limiting yourself to all the other opportunities that decentralized finance brings along. We're now starting to see us as an example and other competitors of ours offering solutions which mix the old and the new. So we custody the keys, and therefore, by definition, the assets protected by those keys, but we allow maximum flexibility what you do with those assets, whether that's clearing and netting on Bosonic, whether it's kind of automated market making on DeFi with Uniswap, whether you're taking liquidity from decentralized pools or from centralized counterparties. We're trying to basically bridge all those scenarios, yeah? And I think there's going to be a lot of, innovation going forward, mixing centralized, decentralized services together, but in a regulated manner. So this is what we bring. We bring regulation, we bring security around keys, we make sure that there are adequate fiduciary and custodial controls, which is what you need. And we facilitate reporting in terms of, NAVs and all the other stuff to feed into fund administrators. So all those functions that you would expect a custodian or a sub-custodian to facilitate, we're starting to bring into the crypto space, with a caveat that in the crypto space, not only are you dealing with centralized counterparties, but you're actually starting to deal with decentralized counterparties like DeFi liquidity pools. And that takes a little while for people to get their head around, but this is going to be the ongoing reality of the crypto space. So I think it's important to be able to deal with both.
As you point out, one of the things traditional custodians do is service the assets as well as safekeep them. And is this what's going on in DeFi must be increasing the need for asset servicing?
No, the opposite.
No?
The whole point of blockchain is that you incorporate the business logic of assets inside the asset itself. Yeah, it's what I call inversion of control. The old world, you had dumb records, and then you relied on the parameter of intermediaries to service them and do the right things. In fact, on blockchain, you can inverse all of that. You put in the business logic into the asset class and the supporting protocols, so that you're no longer relying on intermediaries always to safeguard from a regulatory point of view or from a business rule point of view. The assets are self-protecting and self-servicing. And I think this is the massive benefit. You are cutting a huge amount of cost and risk out, because instead of relying on parameter security, you're relying on essentially the asset itself being self-policing.
And you've never had an institution say to you, well, what if somebody hacks the smart contract which governs my entitlement?
It's the same risk as you have with a bank being hacked. And I think, there's always a risk. There are now insurance products like Nexus Mutual that allow you to mitigate some of that risk. And also, we've seen examples where, for instance, security protocols and security software used to be proprietary, and now everyone accepts that you use open source, OpenSSL, for instance, libraries. Why? Because the amount of people that have studied them is infinitely more than a closed environment. So if you're focusing on the technology aspect to enforce the rules, the more eyes you have, which is what you have on the smart contracts, they lower the probability that someone will kind of ultimately not find the bug early on. So I believe that longer term, smart contract-based open systems are going to be considered the gold standard of security, rather than the closed shop protocols where there's just not enough eyes on them.
Mm-hmm. Because the people writing these smart contracts are obviously learning from experience, the quality must improve over time.
Yeah, and there are thousands of people reviewing their work and frankly hacking it. Yeah. It's a ferocious environment where any mistake is pounced on by thousands of super qualified developers. But after a while, when they iron out the kinks, the quality is infinitely better.
But one reason people like big fat global custodian banks was because if something did go wrong, if their entitlement was lost, or a corporate action was missed or something, that big fat bank would make them whole.
And you still have insurance to back you up on this one. Yeah, I mean, people are solving the same problems, just in different ways, kind of. It's same. In the end, you are paying increased fees to a traditional custodian because it effectively puts its balance sheet at risk precisely for that. But if you really think about it, that's just another form of insurance.
And it might be expensive.
For it one way or another. Yeah, you'll pay for it one way or another.
Yeah. It might be more expensive than insurance, is what I was thinking. Just before I let you go, just on a technical side of custody, what does it mean to safekeep the keys? Are we talking locking it in a cold wallet and disconnecting the internet? Are we talking multi-sig? Are we talking multi-party computation? Or are we talking all of the above?
Usually a combination of most of those scenarios. The key thing to remember is that crypto, the whole space here came out of peer-to-peer. So the idea was that you have an individual. The individual has the private key, and therefore kind of any transactions must be signed with the private key. As soon as you get institutional, you now have the problem of how do you share safely those keys but have enough control. And that's the problems we solve for, Because once you've shared the key with someone, you can't unshare it. So imagine, the CTO leaves the company and he knows the private key. You now need to move all your assets off the private key to a new one that the CTO doesn't know about before he steals or she steals the funds. So kind of the trick there is, of course, kind of keeping the keys generated and used in a safe manner, and then making sure that any transactions that are performed with those keys are done with appropriate controls, whether those are business controls like multi-signature, which is really an approval flow, through to kind of compliance checks on transactions for suspicious activity. So there's a lot of overlap with the old world, but the mechanics of what you do for custody and crypto is very different to traditional assets.
Dominic, just to add to that, I mean, I think the other thing that a lot of people don't realize is that a lot of, most institutional investors, particularly if they're fiduciaries in a regulated jurisdiction, having control of the keys is like self-custody, right? So there is an actual necessity for institutions to use a neutral third-party custodian to protect the assets. And so I think that's a lot of times people ask us about certain solutions, that really ultimately, depending on how you use them, you can use some of those wallet solutions like a Fireblocks to be a backstop for a custody business where you're running a custody business and you're a neutral custodian using that technology. If you use it directly to interact with your counterparties, you're really doing self-custody. And that's a point that's often lost on people, right? That's not suitable for a very, very large swath, if not the majority of institutional investors.
Now, we've had a question on this, one of the topics we were talking about a while ago here from Lee Sager. He says, would you agree that the decentralized finance protocols have the added risk of the DAO governance organization altering the protocol in ways that the investors never contemplated?
There is no straightforward answer to that because the answer depends. But there are certain protocols out there that have a large degree of upgradability, subject to effectively third parties approving the upgrades of those smart contracts. And the smart contracts, think of it as your shareholder agreement equivalent, So it's good to have ability to upgrade those. Things change, but then the risk is transferred from code to who's allowed under what circumstances to change that code, and if that code that's been changed is kosher after the change. So to be honest, it's a necessary evil of any environment that changes. But yes, you absolutely then need to have very good governance. And that's why a lot of protocols will have what's called state governance. And state governance just means that whoever's proposing changes and whoever's approving the changes tends to be a large holder of the token. And then if they allow the change to happen that's ultimately detrimental, they are the ones punishing themselves because the value of the protocol disappears, therefore the value of the token disappears, and therefore effectively the value that they've created up to that point also disappears. So there is a incentivization loop back process to guarantee that, frankly, the people who are the most skin in the game are most incentivized to get it right.
And do we have the equivalent of shareholder agreements? It sounds like Lee has identified a real risk here, but it's one which might be familiar from traditional markets. Do you touched on regulation, do you have the documentation to argue?
Yeah, it's called code. The documentation is code. This is what people are trying to kind of get their head around. But in reality, it's code. Read the code. That's your agreement.
Okay. Code is law.
To some extent, yes. Although we know that's not necessarily always true. But just like any agreement, contractual agreement has a lot of wiggle room. We all know that it exists and can be used when necessary. There will always be overriding factors above smart contracts, but the code gives you very good and very precise basis to start off on.
Could we touch on Lee says, thank you for asking my question. You've got a follow-up actually, but staking control, that leaves open the possibility of a conflict of interest. I think you kind of dealt with that, Alex, by saying that the conflict is resolved by the largest owner has no incentive to create that problem. I don't know you want to add to that.
There's always residual risk. Yeah. So
and insider trading, he says. Yeah, I think he's identified a real risk there. Somebody else says the code has bugs, but we were talking about that, particularly in relation to smart contracts, which are not contracts legally speaking, as we know. But that's a point. I guess you guys would answer that's the bugs are being gradually driven out by hackers trying to hack smart contracts, and indeed by smart contracts getting audited and so on. So they're improving, but
I guess just one point on this one, and I've when I used to run innovation labs at banks, there is no such thing as a definitive contract. The contract is a summary of many different verbal and non-verbal, written and non-written set of agreements. And therefore, the smart contract code can be, and has been in a number of legal cases, seen as part of the contributing body of evidence to a particular kind of settlement, as much as any other written or verbal form of agreement. So it's not the sole contract, but it can contribute to the body of evidence when arguing a case in court.
Yeah. Has the risk of, somebody else is asking here, 51% of tax, has that risk gone away or mutated in some way?
No, still there.
And how big is it? What do you say to institutional investors? I'm very worried about 51% of tax.
It's roughly about 51%.
Now we were going to touch on settlements just very quickly. Rosario, this is probably your area of interest, the atomic settlement. Now, if I've understood it correctly, atomic means pre-funded accounts. I mean, stuff has to be there, otherwise it can't happen. Is that right?
Well, actually, we started out with pre-funded accounts, right? So you have assets that both counterparties have at a custodian that are essentially tokenized onto a custodial layer 2 blockchain ledger, which is part of the overall Bosonic network. And it's not just atomic settlement. It's really what happens is the assets that are on those custodial ledgers are cryptographically provably there. They're read into things like our execution pipeline. So when you get into real-time pre-trade risk, it's essentially reading the UTXO set of the client off the custodial ledger to know whether or not they have the assets to do the trade. When you get into through pre-trade risk, you get into the matching engine. When you have a trade match or an order match, you end up with execution that's actually happening on chain as a truly atomic transaction where you're concurrently changing the ownership of the two assets in real time in literally milliseconds on the custodial blockchain ledgers, that layer 2 ledger. And then what happens is, I mean, it's a bit nuanced, but what's really happening there is it's still a peer-to-peer trade that essentially self-clears and settles by virtue of the technology. The custodians, and neither the custodians nor Bosonic are novating any trades, taking any balance sheet risk. The custodian, like the function that Trustology performs, is essentially doing the net settlement movements periodically based on all of that activity that's happening on the custodial blockchain ledgers. I think your You had another part of that question. I missed the other half of it.
No, I asked solely about pre-funding. I'm just wondering if is the process exactly the same for the collateralization of a transaction as well? The bit that replaces the need for a prime broker, is it exactly the same process and technology you're using, whether it's an exchange of value or a collateral transaction?
Yeah, well, let me back into that by first saying, so we were talking about pre-funding, right? So yes, today it's pre-funded. We can let people trade on bilateral credit and enforce credit limits, but we're adding a lending marketplace, and this is where it gets pretty interesting, because that lending marketplace lets borrowers and lenders maintain their collateral in their own accounts at custodians. And instead of transferring collateral to the lender and transferring coin to the borrower, and then doing borrows is essentially then a repo transaction that happens on the layer 2 custodial blockchain ledger. And what that allows for is it allows for people to trade on the full spectrum, fully funded to fully on credit, because they can effectively repo in assets intraday to finance leverage and margin positions. And so that gives you the ability to support all those asymmetries, right? You can have a market maker that typically trades solely on credit. They can now face people that are not able to take credit risk to that counterparty by essentially repoing in intraday the assets to be fully funded and have a legal change of title to the assets on the custodial blockchain ledger to be fully funded against that counterparty. And of course, what's happening in that context, that they're shifting the credit risk to those willing lenders. The beauty of approaching it with all of the assets at neutral custodians on these custodial blockchain ledgers is that you can essentially frictionlessly crowdsource effectively unlimited balance sheet. So anybody that is holding assets at any of these custodians can ultimately come in and price these risks, price people effectively for intraday credit and margin. And that gives you the ability to then support this same transaction flow where you're not strictly participating in a fully funded capacity. And in the prime brokerage context, all that's happening is the bank is using their balance sheet to finance your leverage, right? So in the FX space, your typical high frequency trading shop might have 30-to-1 leverage relative to the assets they're holding at the prime broker. And they then go out and trade on credit lines of the bank. They literally legally and financially trade in the name of the bank when they transact with their counterparty. And that's that credit intermediation piece, right? So in our technology stack, the way this infrastructure is implemented, that atomic exchange of assets, whether it's your assets or you've repoed in the assets, the two counterparties to the trade are effectively completely covered, and it gives you an alternative to that credit intermediation you normally get from the bank with big bank balance sheet.
Mm-hmm. And the prime broker's balance sheet obviously has limited capacity, so
yeah, and they're de-risk. I mean, even in plain vanilla assets like FX, which is quite calm compared to the crypto markets. The big tier 1 banks are sort of de-risking. There's capital costs around those credit lines and those allocations. So I think it's actually going to be quite hard for. I think it'll be quite a while before we see a big bank come in and actually fully prime broke the digital asset space. So in the meantime, we need an alternative. There's got to be a way for all of these counterparties to face each other without that counterparty credit settlement risk.
Do you think, just for an institutional investor listening to this and searching for parallels to the traditional world he's familiar with, would you liken what you're doing on the collateral side to what Deutsche Börse is doing with HQLAX? In other words, there's all this collateral lying around in these custody accounts. They're trying to make it available, more readily available where it's needed. Do you see parallel to that?
I'm not specifically familiar with what they're doing with that product or platform, but from Alex's nodding, it sounds like some similarities there.
Well, they're digitizing, they're tokenizing, I suppose, assets in custody so that they can be used in repo and stock loan transactions. Alex, you're familiar with it?
To some extent, like we had tokenization used to be called depository receipts, yeah, and to some extent, and been used for a long time. The utility here is the kind of the common distributed ledger that binds all of these entities together. Yeah, in the old world, you had each exchange, and if you wanted to dual list, it was a nightmare, and then you had to have CompuShare and others to move all those kind of tokens around. We now have effectively a global ledger, yeah, that everyone's comfortable with. And that removes so much pain because I'm not having to dual list it and so on, assuming using one blockchain. Because now we have multiple blockchains, which means potentially cross-listing across multiple blockchains, which in itself is a technical problem. But I guess kind of, look, all these things have been done to some extent in a centralized world. The key here is the 24/7 global infrastructure. And then what we're seeing here is this massive ecosystem of highly integrated financial services. Yeah, otherwise known as DeFi and CeFi kind of merging in together, because as soon as I issue a token, whether it's a security token, whether it's non-fungible tokens representing art or non-fungible token representing a legal agreement like a bond, people think of NFTs right now as a kind of art and CryptoKitties, but in reality, I believe the vast majority of NFTs going forward will be kind of commercial agreements and contracts that are non-fungible. All those assets become immediately available for kind of collateralization, trading, hedging through the ecosystem of kind of highly integrated solutions, DeFi, CeFi together. That's the power of it, yeah? And I think until people, it's easy. I've talked to a lot of people coming from the institutional side, and they have all these preconceptions about what DeFi feels like it. And then they actually try it and they go, oh shit, this is so much better. And to be honest, you know, I would encourage everyone to just freaking try it, because if you just talk about it, you'll never get it. You have to try it out. And then you'll see the delta. I don't know about kind of Rosario Lars' views, but I would thoroughly encourage, stop listening to us, try it out for yourself, and then listen again to us. And then I think it'll make a lot more sense.
I'm aware of at least one organization trying to put depository receipts onto a blockchain. So your dream may come true in one sense. I'm glad you mentioned DeFi, because I'd like to bring Lars in at this point. Just try it is Alex's advice. And of course, institutional investors are looking at what's going on in DeFi. They're looking at, yield farming, looking to capture yield for very obvious reasons. They're not getting much in the traditional asset classes. So should they just do it?
Just try it. I think that's a difficult sell. Maybe I should try that in my pitch tomorrow. I'll try and make 5 cold calls and just try it, for the sake of it. So I think there's of course been a number of reports. I actually just read a report this morning from Crypto Valley and Zug, and still, what are the barriers to institutional adoption? Still regulation, counterparty risk, and safety of funds. They remain the 3 main points. And I think I read the same in the Fidelity survey last year. So and of course, I think we collectively need to address this. And I don't think it's amongst the clients that I talk to, at least, where the just try it will work. I wish, actually, Alex, but so maybe you can say we try harder. But I think, we need to address the concerns that these institutions have. We work on the regulated framework, 3 of us actually. So we are, regulated by nature, and we're also on the new FCA crypto asset register. We don't do self-custody that both Rosario and Alex, they addressed a while ago, because I just think that wouldn't work. It wouldn't fly. And of course, counterparty risk, well, I guess that's the whole point. That's what we need to eliminate in this brave new world in so many ways. I think we're only scratching the surface of where we're heading. And I'm by no means as technical as Alex. That's why I work with people like Alex. Trying to build some institutional rails for the new world, and I see so many similarities and so many ways. I also come from the FX world as Rosario, and of course, it was a good time. We made good money, but we also know where and how it's inefficient. And there's so many ways where the crypto and digital can essentially address that. And I think we're only seeing the beginning. And I'm not talking about Bitcoin in 100,000 or 200,000 because I don't really care about that. It's more that DeFi and tokenization of so many things, non-fungible, all these fine buzzwords, but in a low practical way. Peer-to-peer trading that's possible in so many ways technically. Why not move ahead with it? Why not try and make the financial service system more efficient? And I think we all three are addressing it, because in so many ways, if we're honest, the crypto trading is still very, very inefficient. Super inefficient. So I spent 20 years in FX, where we could execute and do the full trade life cycle in milliseconds, and then it went to microseconds, etc., etc. I'm not saying we need to go there anytime soon, but we are gradually, all three of us are of course trying to address and make a business around the inefficiencies in crypto. We're trying to address the concerns. We're regulated, we're credible, we're not counterparties to the trading. So I at least see that's the purpose and the mission.
Well, this is actually a good point to talk about why the three of you are working together. But just before we do that, Alex, there's your joke or riposte about the risk of a 51% attack is 51%. Our attendee has come back as a 51% plus China, so the risk is actually bigger than 51%. But before we, which is a good point, I guess, but before we start to talk about the issues more generally, perhaps I could ask each of the three of you to explain why it makes sense for you to work together. If you could just very briefly in your own words describe why you thought it made sense to join forces with your two counterparts here, and why that is, what are the benefits of doing that for institutional investors as briefly as you can. And perhaps Lars has touched on this already. Perhaps I could start with you, Rosario, to give us, why does this deal make sense, A, for you and B, for your potential institutional clients?
Yeah, well, it makes great sense for us and our clients, because Lars represents a source of aggregated liquidity that we can basically make available to trade by anybody on our network that has assets at a custodian like Trustology. And so the whole idea here is that to think about what we do very much like people think about prime brokerage. It's really about freedom of choice and being able to have effectively direct market access and the ability to aggregate any number of liquidity sources and trade them all truly without counterparty credit or settlement risk from your own account at a custodian. And so we're just the technology layer that facilitates that. We're very much dependent on both of these other parts of the equation, both the good deep liquidity that we get from GCX and also from a neutral custodian like Trustology to hold those assets on behalf of the clients. And I think one of the things that is really important is just the fact that we're totally custodian agnostic. So institutional investors, they all have different sort of lenses they're looking through. They want to have freedom of choice of how they custody their assets. They want to have freedom of choice of what liquidity they're facing, and they certainly don't want to have the pain point directly of holding assets at a bunch of retail exchanges and setting credit lines up with a bunch of market makers and then having to aggregate all that liquidity together. That's just maybe a bridge too far, I think, for a lot of the institutions. So hopefully together we're able to sort of deliver one nice, neat package where they can access all the liquidity they like from the comfort and safety of their own custody account.
But you're custodian agnostic, Rosario, but you're working with Trustology. What's the additional benefit of doing that for the client?
Well, again, so sort of the lenses I was talking about, the different institutional investors look through, some of those are related to regulatory matters. Some of them are jurisdictional matters. So Trustology is the first custodian we have that's FCA regulated and based in the UK, and is obviously a natural fit for folks that are not don't want to place assets into custody at some of our other custodians that might be in the United States or out in Hong Kong.
Alex, you've heard Rosario talk about liquidity of assets in custody. How would you describe the benefits of this tripartite alliance to an institutional investor?
Of course, yeah. There's a fundamental mismatch between the need to trade at high velocity very frequently and the blockchain's ability to support that. Ethereum is 15 transactions per second throughput with a latency of about 20 seconds at best. Yeah. So if you wanted to trade at that speed, most of us will be out of a job. Blockchain is even worse. It's the latency is 10 minutes. So we want to trade a lot faster than we can settle. It's an age-old problem. T+4 settlement versus the trading environment. So in order for folks to trade, they need something like Bosonic to allow them to trade it faster, essentially, than the speed that is native to blockchain. It's a simple law of physics, or whatever you want to call it. But then, of course, as soon as you're starting to trade off-chain, you run the risk of counterparty not settling properly with you. This is age-old risk as well. And this is what we provide. We act as a settlement agent by initially escrowing assets in our custody, and therefore making sure that what's tokenized on Bosonic equals the actual assets in escrow, and then we fulfill settlement and redemption requests, always making sure that effectively there is no inflated creation of money on Bosonic or any other system, and that we have a nicely cleared settled transaction. So we are part of the value chain, and something like Bosonic is absolutely mandatory right now if you want to trade faster than 15 transactions per second. It's a simple fact. I think, longer term, we will see blockchain speeding up. This will consistently change. And I'm sure the Bosonic network will kind of evolve as well, to match for that. So this is a constantly changing landscape, but right now, something like Bosonic just has to be done to solve for the problem of the speed of the blockchain.
You're doing net settlement. Are you the CLS of the cryptocurrency markets? Because netting it all down is obviously a huge benefit.
Yeah, we don't net it out. It's actually what Bosonic does. Bosonic calculates the netted position, and we simply receive the settlement instruction for the funds in our escrow, and then we execute the transfers.
And Rosario, is the netting where the capital savings come from, or is it the collateralization, or both?
I mean, it's all of the above, right? I mean, the idea here is to trade everything you want from that one account, right? So you have obviously a lot more capital efficiency there. You also have what's going on in the background is sort of real-time multilateral netting. And so what Alex actually sees on the operational side there is he can take it in real time through an API, or he can use a front end that we deliver that lets him see all of the net settlement amounts due at any point in time between all of the counterparties. And so when somebody wants to redeem or based on other aspects of the client SLAs, the custodian can process those net settlement movements based on that cryptographically provable audit trail that we're presenting by virtue of all of these transactions actually happening on a layer 2 blockchain network at the custodial level. So that's so you get a lot of gains, and obviously the speed is one of them. There's also a lot of talk right now around layer 2 solutions, just in terms of eliminating having every transaction hit the ledger, not just from a speed perspective, but from a transaction cost perspective. So you also have kind of just very periodic when Trustology processes net settlement movements, those movements obviously hit the layer 1 public ledgers. but that's a tiny fraction of the actual overall all transaction volume, in a system like this. So there's huge gains across the board.
Thanks, Rosario. Now we have a question specifically for you, Alex, from Lee Sager. Do you hold all of the crypto in a common wallet with your terms and conditions providing that you hold the crypto on trust for the client, or do you do it another way?
So
fiduciary?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, look, this is all new stuff and everyone's experimenting with it. The way we do this is we create a private key for each one of our customers. To be more precise, as many private keys as you want to. So it's probably slightly more akin to the fact that to a account operator model, in the sense that we don't have omnibus accounts where funds are commingled and therefore essentially on our books. The way we view it is we create the private keys. From those private keys, you can generate an infinite number of addresses. This could be used in, some of our clients are brokers. They will create an address per depositor. Some payment providers will create a address per payment. Yeah, it's very cheap to create the kind of addresses to reconcile whether it's deposits, whether it's payments, and so on. And therefore, what we're really doing is custodying those keys, and then using those keys, you can have a look at all your assets, and it's always segregated. So you can always independently monitor what we do through independent blockchain explorers. So we can prove cryptographically to you, we're not rehypothecating your assets. We're not in any way lending or doing anything with them unless you ask us to. And the really interesting thing we're emerging right now is this unbundling of the bank, yeah? Because people say, well, how can I earn yield with you guys? And they're like, well, you don't need to take counterparty risk on us as a custodian in terms of credit risk. But if you want to earn yield and assets in our custody, just use DeFi protocols like Aave, Compound, etc. to earn yield. So essentially, we've unbundled the keeping stuff safe and the bit around earning interest by kind of segregating it across different service providers. And that brings incredible utility to any assets that are stored with us, because you don't have to take the package of security and credit risk. You can unbundle those two and get the best of both worlds in an open architecture.
And those deposits in DeFi instruments are even better, are collateralized.
Depends, yeah. So some are collateralized at 150%. In fact, most collateralization right now on DeFi is at about 150% because it's anonymous. You don't know the counterparty. And you also are kind of building in the market risk. And that's why a lot of people, rule of thumb, about 150%. What we're seeing is an emergence of lending, like Rosario was saying, and there's different models for that. But one of the unique positions for a custodian like us is essentially ability to dereference an anonymous address or sets of addresses to a particular customer. So what we can do is we can present on permission the netted portfolio risk, and therefore plus essentially the identity. And given those two, we can start driving under collateralized lending, and we're running a number of proof points around that space. Because with us, we can tell you who the borrower is, all the assets they have, and we can prove those assets. And because we can control the transaction flow, we can create a walled garden across those assets. And therefore, a lender is safe in the knowledge that they can lend against their portfolio to a high degree of reasonable assurance. So I think this is really exciting, where I think custodians will have a unique position where we can start attacking the under collateralized lending value propositions.
Well, it sounds good. You've got an account which is not an omnibus account. It's a segregated account. You've got capital savings. You've got collateralized risk. You've got counterparty credit risk dealt with. You haven't got to pay for a prime broker's balance sheet. And and this is all created by the alliance of your three organizations. Now, I'm wondering, we've got about 10 minutes to go now. I'm wondering if we could talk a little bit about where this is all going to end up. Could we talk a bit about the type of firms we see becoming active? And I'm talking here really of traditional firms as opposed to firms that have been in the crypto market for some time. And more specifically, are we seeing high frequency traders come into this sector yet, or is it still too slow and too expensive in terms of infrastructure for that to happen? Is the connectivity simply not there? Who are we seeing come is my question, to take advantage of what's going on in these markets?
Well,
Lars, one for you, I think.
I definitely see some high frequency guys entering, because it's like, almost a candy store, the crypto market, because it's so latent and so inefficient that you can do arbitrage that we haven't seen in FX for as long as I remember. So I think they're already there, and I don't think it's a coincidence that if we look at what I would call the biggest market makers, I've signed so many NDAs, so I can't actually mention their names, but they are also active in the traditional world, or they come from the traditional world. I think we can say that there's a bunch of Goldman Sachs guys that have gone in different directions. I guess it was a bad bonus season, and then they set up whatever. So I think you can see almost who's who in a lot of crypto market makers from Goldman and Morgan and elsewhere. So I definitely think we are seeing them already. On the client side, maybe less so, because a lot of these guys, even the big makers, they still cloud hosted. So it's not like we're still not talking microsecond co-location and stuff, because that's not relevant at all. But still ample arbitrage opportunities. But then the arbitrage opportunities, of course, are also restricted by the transfer costs and again the lack of central clearer. And I think that's what Rosario, of course, is trying to address. What comes next? When we talk about crypto today, it's primarily around exchange tokens. But really, I personally, and I'm not an evangelist all of a sudden, but I do think that the next wave with security tokens and tokenization in general is much more interesting, actually, in so many ways, because then that's where again we will see the efficiencies, and we sit here kind of in the Western world, and we all from banks, etc. Really the use case for blockchain and security tokens, etc., is more in the emerging markets. If we're honest, I can transfer dollars in a second to Rosario and sterling to Alex. So that it's not that inefficient. But the inefficiency, look at the people in Turkey now. Oh, sorry, FX insider. But Erdogan, he fired there was a massive change in the value of Turkish lira over the weekend. The poor people in Turkey, if they wanted, they couldn't do anything because they have capital restrictions. So hey, blockchain or any digital asset would be a huge benefit for these people more than us, really. So I think we're only scratching the surface, and the next wave and the next 5 to 10 years, this smells like FX 20 years ago to me in so many ways. And I think what we are doing here and what we have achieved so far is really only the beginning of something much bigger. And let's see. Part of the solution, part of the the answer is also, to an extent, regulation. I know that's a bit counterintuitive, but that we trust each other, and there's a trusted framework that we work with. I think that's a glorious road ahead of us, really.
Thanks, Lars. We've got a couple of questions here. We're into our last 5 minutes now. I'd like to pick up before we leave what you had to say about security tokens. But we have a question here from Oluyemi Ajiboso. He says, when are we likely to see the commingling of crypto and legacy assets on FI books? And how will the intraday fluctuations be likely managed? So the world you were looking forward to there, Lars, in which this technology, this way of doing things starts to invade the conventional securities markets, these two things are going to have to live side by side, not just in terms of infrastructure, in terms of trading houses, but actually in terms of how these things appear on the books of financial institutions. You're nodding, Alex, which I hope means you have something, a sensible answer to Oluyemi's question.
I guess the first movement will be a sub-custodian arrangement. It'll be extremely inefficient because all the big custodians are not going to be replacing their general ledgers. So there'll be a requirement to synchronize the decentralized ledger with a centralized ledger. I would guess probably through a bunch of Swift messages. Yeah. So there's going to be kind of really ugly hacks to start with. And then, of course, the issues around accounting. How do you treat Bitcoin? Are you treating that as a commodity? Are you treating that as money? And some of those questions, especially in the US, are still not fully resolved because different regulators consider them as both in some cases, which is quite unique. So there are some accounting challenges. And then, of course, kind of how do you treat with counterparties? Yeah, especially with DeFi. We're going to see huge problems around how do you treat a decentralized liquidity pool. Now, interestingly, we're seeing a couple of things. So, for instance, in I think Wisconsin, they've now put legislation forward to recognize a decentralized autonomous organization, which is really just another word for a smart contract, as a legal entity in its own right. Once we have that legal framework, it makes it a lot easier because you can start looking at AML risk, counterparty risk of a smart contract like you do with any company. So I think that's going to resolve a lot of issues there. We also had some clarification around legal ownership based on private keys. So Switzerland recently introduced legislation that basically said ownership of the private key does actually equate to ownership of an asset, which again was legally a blank spot. But that then confirms, at least in Switzerland, that if you go to court and you can present the private key, you can prove in case of dispute that you own that asset as a result of that. So I think we are starting to move towards legal recognition of ownership of private keys equals ownership of assets, and then legal recognition of decentralized autonomous organizations as yet another form of a SPV, effectively. So that helps. And then the question is accounting for sometimes highly, highly complex scenarios. We're seeing interest-bearing tokens on DeFi right now that are effectively made up of collateralized Ether in a CDP, which then was lent out to Compound, which in itself was then used as a hedging product and then sold on a market. Try accounting for that. So I think that is going to be blowing some people's minds in terms of how you account for, P&L and all that kind of stuff on chain. So I think there is kind of, to echo Lars, we now have this amazing ability to apply the full weight of financial capabilities that we got used to with assets like securities and cash. But now we're going to have this massive veracity of different assets, from digital art potentially being collateralized, and the full weight of financial services being applied to that. But then how do you account for that? So I think it will take time. People will go in with the more simple instruments like ETH, BTC, then some more well understood kind of other tokens. And then we'll start looking at the complexities of accounting for the liquidity pools, which to me is the more exciting aspect, because you now have set protocol and a bunch of other capabilities that are pooled assets of variable different risk, fungible, non-fungible tokens. But it will take time.
Yeah. sadly we're out of time now, but I'd like to round this off with a final question about security tokens. But before we do that, Alex, perhaps you could just answer this question from Alex Powell. Coiny found crypto custody too hard to get off the ground. Why will you be different?
I think it is a tough business. I think look, I'm a technologist, and we always took it from a technology point of view. Yeah. And I think we've seen some competitors who took it very much from a kind of, here's the old school of how we did it before, and therefore we just apply that to kind of the new world. And I think what we've tried to do was to deconstruct and said, look, there are new fundamentals, and we have to build a solution that respects the new fundamentals, but doesn't forget to address the needs of customers coming into that market. And it's really, really tricky to get that balance right. But I think blockchain is very much a techie kind of bottom-up experience. So if you ignore the tech, I think you will fail. But equally, if you ignore the business side of it, you will also fail. And perhaps sometimes people won't be able to strike that correct balance all the time.
Yeah, and I think just to add to that, and I think this is a really important point, and when if you're out looking for a custodian, I don't think you want custodians. I mean, the custodians that are in the space are quite small, even despite some of the cap raises that we're reading about with some of them. I don't think the custodians can build everything themselves and be an island, and that means, be careful. I'm not sure custodians should be building out, all of the trading kit and becoming a venue and becoming a principal to the transactions and the whole 9 yards, and trying to use their balance sheet to give people leverage. And I mean, you see this stuff happening across different custodians. I don't think anybody but the traditional custodians have the balance sheet big enough to sort of play that game. So I think that's another thing to be careful about, because obviously you want to have a custodian that's solving their particular piece and going to be around for the long term.
I totally agree with you, Rosario, because in the traditional world, we had Chinese walls and, fines for breaching the Chinese walls. But again, we see so many mistakes over again that we've done in traditional finance now happening in crypto. But that's a very, very good point. Custodians wanting to do trading, wanting to do, money supermarket. And we know it'll end in tears and, conflict of interest. The way I was taught conflict of interest, if there's a conflict of interest, you either deal with it or get rid of it. And the best way is to get rid of it. And not everyone is dealing with the conflict of interest in what I would deem to be an adequate way right now. But
yeah, and I don't think that means. Just sorry, real quickly. I don't think that means custodians shouldn't be doing things like staking and tapping into DeFi on behalf of customer requests. What I mean is, the rest of the infrastructure, right? Because that's a very sort of crypto native thing that dovetails really nicely with somebody who's holding the private keys on behalf of an institution, is to put those assets into different vehicles or via these different protocols. I think that makes a lot of sense. But I think some of what we see other people doing doesn't make a lot of sense.
We've run 4 minutes over, but I'd hate to leave this just hanging there on that point. So I'd like to just get each of you to give us a view of the future. You've all spoken very enthusiastically in different ways about what this is evolving towards. You've all come from this FX background, but you very clearly see this evolving not just into illiquid asset classes like fine art and so on, but actually into the conventional securities markets. Alex, you mentioned Swift. We had Swift on a webinar here a few weeks ago, and they expect the security token markets to be of equivalent size to the current securities markets within 5 to 10 years. So even Swift is enthusiastic about the possibilities here. So just my closing question is, for each of you, Rosario, how long do we need to wait before we see funds in particular, as opposed to trading houses, coming into this market, household name funds coming into this market in a major way? How long do you think we need to wait?
I mean, I think it's starting to happen now. I mean, the first wave. I mean, first of all, what used to be institutional really meant family office and high net worths. I think that has changed in the last 4 or 5 months, right? We now, obviously, you can see the corporates, you can see real institutional demand. We certainly, we're in the middle of, working with traditional Wall Street firms to set up full-blown trading desks in crypto on behalf of their internal trading teams and for execution on behalf of their clients. So it's definitely happening. The demand is there. The demand is real. And I think I don't know if that was you were trying to get specifically to the point of security tokens, but I think the first wave that we're seeing is really people that are, in the last few months, are people that have come in, dipped their toe in through very white glove kind of services where they go to a big name and they say, help me acquire some Bitcoin. Obviously that's gonna cascade into sort of the people that are more actively trading these assets that are also traditional funds and fiduciaries. And I think that's accelerating as of now. I think the securities tokens market is a little bit longer of a tail, but I agree with Lars and I think probably Alex that this is not a 10-year long tail. This is converging faster than I think people understand, and I think we're going to see a lot of issuance that happens natively digital. And once all of the regulatory and technology and clearing and settlement stuff all lines up, there will be much lower barriers for people to go that route, and obviously they're going to get a lot more efficiency, save money, get greater reach, and realize all the benefits of this sort of new digitized world.
Lars, are BlackRock and Capital International and Janus Henderson bashing down your door already, or must we wait a few years?
Not yet, but you'd probably be surprised, I guess, like Rosario, that we actually have a couple of I would say tier one names that we work with one way or the other. I think there's of course also Wall Street Bank. Are they not active? So more people are probably dipping their toes than you think, but they're not too public about it. I think Standard Chartered have been public about some initiatives.
I'm talking funds specifically, fund managers, asset managers, the buy.
Yeah, well, again, I think we're bang one side or the other. I think that no one that I know are super public about what they do. But I don't think you're talking 10 years. I think you're talking 1 to 2 years at most.
Right. Wow. Okay. Last word from you, Alex. 1 to 2 years or 5 to 7? Before the funds are here in a major, en masse.
Yeah, I think it's 1 to 2 years, and we're going to start to see a lot of. I think the first wave is going to be bigger boys starting to issue certain amount of assets, whether they're security tokens, as in securities. Like equity or debt. And I think debt will probably come first. Once debt goes on the chain, and we've seen some examples of that, it will need to be traded. And I think you'll see funds doing that more. So I think, 1 to 2 years, I would agree with that.
And sadly, I think we must draw stumps there. We've run 8 minutes over, so that's always a sign that it's been a lively, interesting, fascinating discussion, and I hope that everyone listening has enjoyed it as much as we have. It remains for me only to thank our panelists, Alex Plattner of Trustology, Lars Holst of GCX, and Rosario Ingagiola of Bosonic. Thank you again to the audience for your interest, especially for your questions and your comments. And we look forward to seeing you at our next webinar, which is back to our usual time of 1400 London time next Tuesday, the 30th of March. And we're discussing one of our favorite topics, which is digital identity. I hope as many of you.
Thank you for joining us. You can find this discussion on www.futureoffinance.biz and indeed other planned webinars under current events. I am Wendy Gallagher. If you would like more information about how to work with us, please do email on wendy.gallagher@futureoffinance.biz. Thank you once again.